how to make fight loops, and how to reuse them in different scenes. If you're working on a large battle scene and you want some characters to be fighting in the background, then it's a good idea to make some fight loops that go on infinitely and add some motion to your background. So let's learn how to do that. First, import your characters and items into Blender, and then import your weapons as well, and then be sure to parent the weapons to the characters. If you don't know how to do that, then be sure to check out part 2 of my beginner tutorial series linked in the description. Also, if you are a total beginner and you want to learn how to use Blender, you want to learn the basics of Blender and also Minecraft animations, then be sure to start watching from part 1. All the links will be in the description. Now I will place the characters in front of each other and give them a starting pose. Also, be sure to turn on auto keyframing over here and then go to keying and then turn on location and rotation. I will also go to my output settings, and here I have 30 FPS enabled and the end frame is 250, and we will change this later on. So you can change to any FPS you want, but I will be using 30 for this tutorial, and if you want to follow along exactly, then you can give 30 FPS here. So now let's get started by giving our characters the starting positions. So I'm gonna give the characters a basic pose where they can start swinging the swords. And also you can see that the keyframes are set automatically because I have the auto keyframing enabled. So I will time lapse this and then I will come back quickly. Be sure to give your characters any starting pose you want. Also, one thing I forgot to mention is if you want to select objects while you're in the pose mode, for example, I am in the pose mode right now and I am still able to select the swords, then you can go to edit and then disable lock object mode. By the default, it should be enabled, but if you click on edit and then disable this, uncheck this, then you will be able to select objects while you're in the pose mode. So let's continue and I will come back. And now, once you give your characters a starting position, that you can click on your swords and also adjust them, and then be sure that you set a keyframe for the swords as well. Alright, now we should start animating, and the first thing we need to do is go to frame 10 or whichever frame you want, and then let's add the first motion. The first motion will be the characters clashing the swords, and I'm only going to add the main movements, and then I'm going to add the in-between and the polishing after that. And be sure to move the character's root bones as well if you want. For example, I want to move Steve closer to my character. So I'm going to press on G and then use the scroll wheel to snap it on one axis. Or you can also use GY and then use GY as well. And now let's go to frame 10 or whichever frame you prefer. And then let's add the first swinging motion. So both characters are going to swing from one side to another. In this case, my character is going to swing from right to left. So let's make that motion. I'm going to use Alt-R to reset the body position, then rotate it towards this way. When I take the hand, I'm using RR. I'm typing R twice to add a free rotation. So R is the default rotation and RR is the free rotation basically. I'm going to use G as well to move the shoulder slightly, but don't overdo it. I'm going to move the hand towards the other character. And then I'm going to move this arm back. Now I'm going to do the same for Steve. We're only adding basic movements. We'll polish them later, so don't worry about polishing for now. All right, let's rotate the body as well to make him swing. Then move his hand back. And then move the head towards the character. And then obviously, this looks messy, but we will fix it as we go on. Now, I think my characters are way too close to each other. So what I can do is, I can select the root bone and I can delete this keyframe. So I can go to my timeline, left click and select this keyframe. I can move it by pressing G. But this time I want to press on X and then delete keyframes. And then I'm going to turn off auto keyframing because I don't want the root bones to have any keyframes because I want to adjust them as I go on. So I'm going to press on G, middle mouse scroll wheel, and move it back somewhere over here so that the swords are not intersecting each other and they have space to basically swing at each other. I'm also going to select the root bone for Steve and then press on, I'm going to left click select the keyframe and then press on X, delete. Now we have this starting motion. I'm going to turn on auto keyframe again. don't forget to turn on auto keyframing while you turn it off, because sometimes you might start animating and then you realize you have this off. So turn it on, and then let's see. We have this first motion. And then after this first motion, we need our characters to go back to their starting pose. So basically we need to copy these keyframes, these starting keyframes. So what we can do is basically, I'm gonna first copy the keyframes for my characters. So I'm gonna press on Steve and then press on Control Tab, because I'm gonna go out of the pose mode and then I wanna enter the pose mode for my character only. So I'm gonna press on Control Tab, then press on A to select every bone of my character, and then also Shift select the sword. So Shift and left click the sword to select the sword keyframes as well. And now what I want to do is press on I to set a keyframe for every bone. Now this is a lazier method. The less lazy method would be to go one by one and select the character bones. For example, if I go on and click on like my arm, then Shift select every bone, I can do that. But the reason it's the lazy method is because if you press on A, it's gonna set a keyframe for every other bone as well, which we don't want, and it's gonna be messy. But this time I'm not creating like a full polished animation. It's just gonna be a fight loop, which is gonna be visible in the background. So I can just select every bone, and maybe it's gonna be messy, but it's not going to affect us because we're not going to be messing with the graph editor as well. So having too many keyframes is not going to be issue in this case. So select every bone, press on I, select the sword as well, press on I to set a keyframe. Now left click, go to the frame 0 or whichever is your starting frame. Then left click to select this keyframe. Keyframe which is selected has this yellow color, and then keyframe which is not selected has this white color. So in this case, this keyframe represents every keyframe for the character's bones and the sword as well. So if I click on Shift D, as you can see, I can copy my keyframe and move it forward by sliding my mouse on the timeline. And this time, I want to move this frame to frame 20. And if I insert it to frame 20, you can see what happens. The character goes forward and then goes back. And then if I, for example, if I set the end frame to 20 instead of 250, I can type 20. And if I play back my animation, you can see that it goes infinitely. It basically loops. And I can just copy and paste this however many times I want. But obviously this is not a polished animation. And I'm just showing you that you need to use this principle to loop and then copy and paste keyframes properly. So now let's do the same for Steve, and then let's add the in-between movements and polish our animation. And it will be pretty easy after that. So let's add the same keyframes for Steve. So again, I'm going to select my character's bone and click on Control Tab to go out of the pose mode. I'm going to click on Steve, go to pose mode, clicking Control Tab, A to select every bone, Shift select the sword, press on I to set a keyframe for every bone, then left click select this first keyframe, and then Shift D, and then paste it here. Now if you play back our animation by pressing spacebar or pressing play, you can see that our characters are doing this motion infinitely. But obviously, this is not what we want. So let's polish the animation. First of all, let's add an in-between keyframe. So before they clash their swords with each other right here, we can add an in-between movement. In-between in this case would be frame 5 and then frame 15. So let's go to frame 5, go to my character, click on Control Tab to enter the pose mode. And now I want my character to do this motion. So before he clashes the sword with Steve, I can press RR and then rotate the hand like this. Then I can rotate the body this way as well. Maybe lift up the hand slightly. And then we have this motion right here. Now let's polish this even more. Maybe lift the hand a bit, lift the shoulder, and then on the final frame, I want my character to go more towards the side. Now we have this powerful swinging motion. And now I'm just gonna polish the animation a little bit, add more details, and then let's add the in-between movement here as well before the character goes back. So before the character goes back, I want my character to swing the sword on this way, as if he's pulling the sword back. And then I want to tilt the body down slightly. Tilt the head down as well. And let's see what we have. Okay, you can see that this hand starts twitching while we play back the animation, and the reason is the frame 0 and frame 20 are different. So on frame 0, I changed the keyframe for the arm, so I'm gonna select the arm, again, select this keyframe, and then press Shift D, and then overlap this last keyframe. No, apologies, I selected the wrong bone. So select the arm, select this, Shift D, and then overlap this keyframe. Now you can see there is no more twitching. The keyframes basically look the same. Now I need to do the same for the arm. I did the same for hand, and now let's do the same for the arm. Select this keyframe and Shift D. And we need to do that multiple times as well to make sure that our animation looks the same. And if we change the keyframes here, we need to paste it here. And if we change the keyframes here, we need to paste it here. So basically we need the starting and ending frame to look the same. Now I think the swinging motion is a bit too much. I'm maybe gonna lift it up to match the previous movement. No, I still don't like that. Maybe tilt it down. That looks better. And let's do the same in-between movements for Steve. And then after the in-between movements, I'm gonna polish the animation. So let's make the Steve swing the sword like this. By the way, this shoulder is moved way too high. Okay. Let's tilt the hand this way, tilt the body this way. Tilt the head, adjust the hand and the shoulder. Move the hand forward as if he's preparing to swing. Now I have this slight in-between movement. And on frame 10, I want Steve to move also more towards the side. I can animate the leg as well. And now I want to add the in-between movement starting from here as well. So tilt the hand slightly, just like I did with my character. Tilt the body slightly down to prepare to pull back the sword and prepare for another attack, basically. And let's see. Looks better, but it kind of looks stiff and it needs a bit more polishing. Let's see how it looks. So obviously here the swords are intersecting with each other and we don't want that. So this time we're going to animate the swords as well. So select the sword of Steve and make sure you have starting keyframe set. If not, press on I. Then go forward on frame 5. Adjust it to your liking. For example, I want the sword to be moving here. And then on frame 10, actually before frame 10, on frame 9 or frame 8, for example, on frame 8, I'm going to set a keyframe. And then on frame 10, I'm going to go forward here. I'm going to drag my cursor and then set a keyframe here as well. Now I'm going to do the same for my character. So set a starting keyframe. If you have it, then that's good. If not, then press on I, go forward, set a keyframe for frame 5. This time, obviously, it's kind of tilted up, so I want to adjust it. And then on frame 10 or before frame 10, I'm going to set a keyframe here. And I'm going to set a keyframe on frame 10 as well. So the reason we are doing that is we need frame 8 and frame 10 to basically adjust the swords and avoid them intersecting with each other. So on frame 10, I want the swords to be gliding with each other instead of like intersecting with each other. So I want the swords to be touching each other slightly instead of like going through each other. So let's do that. Now on frame 9, you can see that they're still intersecting. So we can use this frame to pull back the sword. So I'm going to select the sword of Steve, press on R, rotate it, and then press on G to move it back. Make sure it's not going through the character's arm as well. And let's do the same for this character's sword. Press on G to move it back. Press on R to rotate. And I like slight clipping is fine, but don't overdo it, you know. So let's see. Let's play back by using the left and right arrows to play the animation frame by frame. Now, the problem is swords are intersecting this way, like my character's arm is going through Steve's sword. So here we can also adjust the hands frame by frame. So I'm gonna go behind frame 10, which is frame 8. I'm gonna tilt up Steve's hand. I'm gonna tilt up my character's hand as well. I'm gonna use the arm as well. But as you can see, the arm doesn't have a lot of keyframes. So first go to frame 5, select this arm, and then press on I to set a keyframe. And then go forward to about frame 8, move this up, and let's see what we have. Now we have the characters clashing the swords. There's still a bit intersection here. So I can move this hand down, move this hand up, move Steve's arm up. Let's see what we have. Now the swords are touching, and it's not as noticeable that they're intersecting and going through each other. Now here, as you can see, we have like no contact at all. So again, I can select the sword and adjust the sword's keyframes. Like I want the clashing to happen on frame 9. I know it's a bit complicated, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. Let's see. Yeah, now we have a slight touch, and then let's rotate it here on frame 10. And let's see what we have. Yeah, now we have the swords like gliding on each other. And then when there's a contact made with the sword, obviously the sword is going to be pulling back from the impact. So I can go forward on about frame 12 and then move the sword and then rotate the sword here and then rotate the sword here as well, as if they pulled back from the impact. And now I have the slight motion of the swords shaking. And now we have this animation. We already have it looped. We already set the keyframes for the sword. And now all we have to do is just polish it. So I'm going to polish it real quickly. I'm going to time lapse this and I'm going to come back. You can add your variations. You can do whatever you want. So I'm going to see you soon. So I'm back and I did some polishing, and here we have this animation. So I'm going to show you how you can loop it, basically make it go as long as you want. And also I can show you how to reuse it in different scenes. So first of all, let's select all the keyframes for the characters. So if you're in the pose mode for both of them, press on A to select everything. So if I press on A to select every bone, then shift select the swords. I'm going to hover over my timeline, press on A to select every keyframe. Then I can do Shift D. Let's make sure all the keyframes are selected. So press on Shift D, copy the keyframes, and insert the first keyframe here on frame 20. So we need to insert the first keyframe of the copied keyframes to the last keyframes of basically the previous keyframes. So I'm gonna overlap this first keyframe over here on frame 20. And if I play back my animation, you can see that it's copied and pasted. Now, if I want to quadruple this selection, basically I can press on A again to select everything. And if I press on Shift D, I need to insert the first keyframe over on frame 40. So Shift D, and then insert this first keyframe on frame 40. And then if I play back my animation, you can see that it's looping. So I can do this as long as I want. Basically, I can Shift D and copy this as long as I want. Like if you have a 5 or 10 second battle scene, then you can copy and paste it as long as you want. Now, be sure to save this file in your folder. So for example, I'm going to press on File, Save As, and name this like a fight loop. I'm going to name this fight loop. Save As. And now you have this Blender file saved. Also, make sure you have Steve and the swords in one collection. In my case, I have everything here on this collection named Fight Loop Tutorial. So if I hide this, you can see that I'm hiding my collection. So the very last thing we need to do is basically parent these characters to one single object, because when we move them in a new scene, we want to be moving them around easily. We don't want to select them separately and move them around separately. So click on Shift C to bring your cursor to the world origin. Now click on Shift A, empty, and then select plane axis. And then we're going to create this empty. Now you can go to the outliner, left click and drag your empty to this fight loop tutorial collection so that it's going to be in the same collection. Now if I left click and select my character's mesh, and then also shift and left click select Steve, what I need to do is shift and then left click to select the empty as well. So make sure to select the empty last, and if you select it last, it's going to be yellow and the rest of the selections are going to be orange. So make sure you select the empty and then click on Ctrl P, object, and then keep transform. So left click here. And now if I move around my empty, for example here, and then play back my animation, you can see that my characters are going to be doing the same motion, but in a different location. Also make sure when you're moving around the empty, you have the auto keyframe turned off. So in this case, I'm going to delete this keyframe. Now let's Ctrl Z and let's have this placed over here. And then make sure you save your blend file and then locate it in a folder which you're comfortable with. So I'm going to click on Ctrl S. I already have saved it in my folder. Make sure you have everything organized into one single collection. In this case, my collection is called Fight Loop Tutorial. So now if I open a new Blender scene, for example, I have this world imported over here, and I want my characters to be fighting over here. I'm gonna first shift and then left click to bring my cursor over here. So what I can do now is, if I have this new scene, I can go to File, Append, and then locate my scene. In this case, my scene is called Fight Loop Tutorial or Fight Loop. I can left click to go over here twice, left click, and then I can go to Collection. And then my collection was called Fight Loop Tutorial. Make sure you name your collections as well. So if I left click and import this, you can see that we can see nothing. So if I press on F or if I press on numpad period, depending on what you have enabled, if you followed my tutorial series, then you might have set it to F. So if I press on F or numpad period, I can zoom in on my characters. Now I need to select this empty, left click, and then I can be basically moving it around. But if you remember, I did shift and then right click to basically move my cursor on my desired location. So since we have the cursor over here, what we can do is first turn off the auto keyframing, then click on Shift S, and then click on selection to cursor. And now we moved our characters over here. And then be sure to adjust them if you want to, but in this case, it was moved around properly. And if I play back my animation, you can see that my characters are swinging the swords to each other. And if I go back, you can see that if you want a battle scene, you can have your background characters swinging the swords at each other. So that's how we can make the fight loops. That's how you can copy and paste them multiple times. And if I go, for example, on frame 80, I can set the end frame to frame 80 and then play it back multiple times. So it can loop around and play around infinitely. So that's how you can make fight loops and reuse them in different scenes. If you want to support the channel and to get cool rewards as well, then be sure to check out my Patreon page linked in the description. The lowest tier of the Patreon starts at $1, and by joining there, you can get the videos 1 and sometimes 2 days earlier than on YouTube, and also you will have your name in the credits of my videos, like all these amazing Patreons which you can see on the screen. And of course, by joining, you will be supporting the channel and you will be supporting me as well. Feel free to give this video a like if you liked it. Also, if you want to know how to add the wind to your animations and how to make your grass and leaves move with the wind, then be sure to check out this video and I will see you there.